Well, our next question, we're going to come over to Michael. Michael, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Hi, Tom.
Hello.
You've mentioned in the past that you don't really meditate anymore, or put another way, that you are basically meditating all the time. Could you please share some more detail on how you got from a daily meditation practice with transcendental meditation to meditating all the time? Or how would somebody else might get to that point?
That's probably going to be a hard question. It's one of those things that just happens. Over time, it's a slow process that one thing kind of turns into another as far as what you do. I can remember when in order to meditate, I had to sit down in a quiet place, close my eyes, get comfortable, say a mantra for 5 minutes and get my mind there, and then I would be in a good meditation state. All of that process just is unnecessary anymore. And I think it was just over a very long time, I realized that it didn't make any difference. I guess, now that I think about it, you've probably heard me talk before about coming to the conclusion when I was at Monroe Labs that you don't have to go deep into a meditation state. You don't have to get deeper and deeper into the fuzz and the fog to where you're just barely conscious, and then try to slip out the other side to an out of body, that is belief-based. That's not actual. That doesn't actually represent anything real that's going on. This idea that you're supposed to be asleep but awake at the same time, that's a metaphor that really shouldn't be pushed too far into reality. It's just you don't find out of body on the other side of sleep. You find the best out of body when your mind is awake and clear. You're out of body. You're not in this reality, but you're not foggy. You're in a clear, wide open, mind, wide open senses. You're clear in that other reality space. And then I started realizing that the process that I went to get into that was all like a ritual. We're going to go out of body. All right, first I got to lie down in the dark room, and I close my eyes. I get into meditation. I get in an altered state. I relax my body. And all of that was a ritual that I went through. And I became dependent on that ritual. If you're going to go out of body, well, you got to start there. And then I realized that ritual is just unnecessary process. You don't have to do any of that. All you have to do is attach yourself to another data stream, and that doesn't require getting foggy first. And then I first tried that. I thought, well, this isn't going to work. I'm just still, I'm awake, and I'm wide awake. And if I just stay awake, I'll always be in this reality. I have to transition into some other reality. And I realized, well, that's just a belief too. We think that you have to go through a transition to get from here to there. You don't. All you have to do is start processing another data stream. So all of the beliefs we have about the process and the meditation and so on are really unnecessary after a while. And I think they are necessary in the beginning. I think in the beginning, when you're learning, the process and the ritual is helpful, maybe even necessary. But eventually it becomes beside the point. You don't really need to do any of that. Oh, okay, I remember that place those people I was talking to. Bingo, I'm there. And I just drop this reality and go to that reality, and I don't have to meditate. I don't have to relax. I don't have to do anything first. So does that mean I never meditate, or that I meditate all the time? And I'm always in that open space, ready to go? Well, I don't know that. I think either way is an accurate interpretation. They both mean the same thing at that point. In other words, you have an intuitive side and you have an intellectual side. And you don't really need a process to go from one to the other. all you do is shift your attention. And the process is there to learn how to shift your attention. So just like using, binaural beats as training wheels on a bike, you've probably heard me make that analogy. Your binaural beats are like training wheels on a bike. They'll help you get there, they'll help you keep that good altered state, even though you haven't disciplined your mind enough to do it on your own. They'll help you. But eventually you have to take the headphones off and let them go and do it all on your own. You need to progress past the point that you need that ritual, that you need that help, that process. So I think all of it's like that. You can jump back and forth between the intuitive side and the awake side in a split second. Good example. You learned how to touch type, right? Most young people these days touch type. Old people like me, we look at a key and we punch it with a finger, and then we find the next one and we punch that one, it's that sort of thing. Because we didn't learn keyboarding. That didn't come until, we were way past the point of needing to do that, because those days at work, you had secretaries that did that. Now everybody does that on their own, but there were secretaries that would do that, and you'd hand them that stuff and they would touch type. It wasn't any point for you to learn that. You never needed that skill until personal computers came out, and then everybody needed to be able to type. But the touch typing is entirely an intuitive space. That is, your fingers know where to go. Let's say you're reading something and you're typing it. You don't look, the S, let's see, it's on this row up there, and you punch it. Your finger just goes there all by itself. It's intuitive. It's not intellectual. Now, do you have to sit down and meditate first before you can touch type? And then do you have to come out of it and get back into this reality before you can hold a conversation? No, you can go back and forth between touch typing and being in this reality in tenths of seconds, in hundreds of seconds. You don't even know there's a transition. You go to type, you just do it. Well, that's entirely intuitive. And then you can come out and have a conversation, be entirely intellectual, and go right back, put your fingers on the keyboard, it's entirely intuitive again. You see, it's the same thing. You can jump back and forth to those in fractions of a second without any problem. And going out of body and doing paranormal things is the same way. But we learn through ritual. We learn through process. And when you very first time you learned to type, you did look at the keys. You did do that, because otherwise you had no idea where any of the keys were. So it starts out an intellectual process. And you do say, well, this is, what is it? I have to look at my keyboard. I don't know, QWERTY, Curity, right? And that's on the top of the keyboard. And you start with an intellectual knowledge of where they are. And in order to hit that R, it's up and a little to the right with that finger. But if you don't transition into the intuitive side, you'll never type more than 5 or 10 words per minute, at best. Because using your intellect, you're going to be slow and clunky, because the intellect isn't good at doing things fast and smoothly. It has to think about everything. That takes time. You don't want to think about it when you're touch typing. You just put your hands out there and let them run around all over the keyboard. And when you look, there it is, you're done, and it works. You don't know how, but it does. Well, this is the same way. So I don't know exactly when that transition came, but it came slowly, as I guess your touch typing does. It's just a little bit. You kind of can do it sort of without looking and know where they are. And then you get better and better and better at it the more you practice. And pretty soon you're so good at it that the transition disappears. And anytime you can sit in front of a keyboard and do that and probably carry on a conversation at the same time. You can both have your intellect running and your intuition running at the same time. Yeah. So that's possible. And it's the same with out of body. It's the same with all the paranormal. It's the same with all of those things. Eventually, Your intuitive side gets it and just does it automatically. And then you find the process to be burdensome, slows you down. You know, I mean, who that was really good at touch typing would ever sit down and look at the keyboard and say, oh, there's the R, and punch it with the finger, and there's the T. I mean, that would be like outrageously inefficient. That would be stupid. Why would anybody want to do that? You know, well, that's kind of the way you feel then with meditation. Why would somebody have to sit down and relax first and, you know, and then get into a meditation state? That's just skip all that and just go to where it is you're trying to go to. But that takes practice. You can't do that on day one. First time you sit down and look at a keyboard, you're not going to touch type. You're going to have to put some serious hours in before you learn that. You know what? The quick brown fox jumped over some kind of dog, right? The thing that types all the letters in a little sentence that you learn to type with. But anyway. So that's it, Michael. That's the best way I can explain it, is just eventually you let go of all the ritual and all of the process that you go through, and it's just not necessary anymore, because the getting into that intuitive space is simple, is trivial once you have done it enough that you don't need the process anymore. So that's just how it works. It's kind of a natural thing that happens without you ever thinking about it. You start one way, and eventually you let go of the stuff that's inefficient and you don't need anymore. I don't know that there was a transition point that I went from one to the other. It just was too gradual to notice.
So you never did any sort of like mindfulness-based practice, or trying to stay present in the moment, like when you're not meditating, but going throughout the rest of your day? So for me, the reason why I'm kind of getting to this is I'm finding maybe that sort of practice to be helpful, because when I'm doing a regular sort of meditation, or if I'm in Tom's Park or whatever, I can maybe, you know, concentrate for a few minutes, but then I get some random other thought pop into my head and my mind just latches onto that, and I'm out of Tom's Park, I'm out of doing whatever, and I'm on something else. And it takes me a little while to my mind to realize that I've jumped onto something else, and then I realize I'm like, oh, okay, get back to, you know, Thomas Park or whatever. And yeah,
that's the practice I'm talking about. It takes that kind of practice, which means you'll never do it if you don't really have the drive to grow in that direction. But see, touch typing's the same way. If you never had a drive to learn how to type, then you never learn. You still are looking at the keys and punching with one finger at a time, because you have to get to a point to say, I want to learn how to touch type, and I'm going to do whatever exercises I need to get me to that spot. And you do. Going out of body and being mindful is the same thing. What being mindful does is it says, don't be a zombie. You know, don't go through your life on automatic, so that life just happens and it passes you by, and you're not really making any, you know, you're not really making many choices. You're making them all by default. You're not thinking, you're not connecting, you're not experiencing, you're not really aware. You know, you're doing the dishes because somebody has to do them, and your mind is someplace else, and you're just going through the motions, instead of thinking that these dishes need to be done. And I'm doing this because I'm a part of the family, and this is work that the family has to have done. So I have the opportunity, so I'm doing it, and I'm glad to do it because it's helpful to other people. You know, if you have that attitude, now you're making a choice to do dishes for the right reason, because it's helpful to other people, and because you're available, and because you want to be part of the solution for everybody. Now, that's a good choice, and you can grow from that. If you're just a zombie and, oh, it's my turn, okay, you give it and you do it, and you go through all the motions, and then you're done, you haven't learned anything. You're not really living your life through good choice. You're just living your life doing what you have to do to get by. You're not taking charge of your life. So that's why everybody says, be here now, be present, focus on what you're doing and how you're doing it and why you're doing it. You know, that's important, because you can learn from all those things. You can say, well, you know, I do those dishes all the time, but I really don't like it and I sort of resent it and I wish somebody else would do it and I feel kind of stuck with it and other people aren't doing their fair share, you see, and all that is de-evolutionary. That's not good, but that's the way zombies end up. Zombies just go through life doing what they have to do, and they do the minimum and they slip by, and then you've got a whole life lived and you didn't learn much because you weren't paying attention. So that's the paying attention thing, and that's a skill because it's easy to be a zombie. It doesn't take any effort to be a zombie. And like anything else, if you don't put in much effort, you don't make much progress. So you can go through a life as effortlessly as possible as a zombie on automatic and hardly learn anything at all. Or you can keep your mind open and your awareness focused and understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And you're doing it because you choose to do it, not because it's an obligation or you have to do it. Well, that may be true. It may be an obligation, or you may have to, but that's probably not the only way of looking at it. It may be an obligation, but is it an obligation you accept? Is it an obligation that you're glad to serve? Or are you doing it against your will because somebody's threatened you if you don't do it? Well, that makes a whole lot of difference. There are different choices there, different attitudes. And one of them's a good attitude and the other one's not such a good attitude. So that's why the be here now is to stop being the zombie and do things because you want to do them, because they're the right thing to do, and you choose to do them, not for the wrong reason or for no reason at all. You just do them because you do them because that's what you've always done, and you're just on auto. So.
Yeah, I think I remember being a little kid actually, and at some point I made that decision to be a zombie with, doing some chore or something, and I was like, no, this is boring. I got to do it anyway, but hey, I can be off in my mind doing something else. And that's, like you said, it's easier. And nobody really teaches you that or talks about that, especially when you're a young kid and you just kind of, I don't know, it's just like the path of least resistance, I guess. So you can do it. And I've been doing, it's a habit that you build and that I've done my whole life. And now I'm just trying to come back around to being mindful with doing even just everyday chores. And it's interesting. Like you feel more alive. And
absolutely, you feel more focused, and actually you enjoy life more because the things you're doing you're not just doing them because you did them yesterday, and it's something that you do every day. You're doing things for a reason. Everything you do should be part of the solution for yourself and for other people. It should be meaningful. You should be contributing and making those decisions purposefully and being aware. It's a skill that you learn, but eventually when you learn it, then you don't have to think about doing it. You just are that way. You're plugged in to what you're doing, and you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you're okay with it. Some things you may not enjoy doing, but you do them anyway because they need to be done. They're part of the solution, and you're willing to do them. So you do. And if other people maybe should be helping out, but they're not, well, you might mention it to them, but if they really resist, then you figure, well, that's just where they are. They haven't grown up to the point yet that they're not so self-centered. It's all about them. And that's okay. That's not something that upsets you. It's something you just accept that is the way they are. You see, unless they're 5 years old and then you're the parent, then you can't just accept them and let them be 5 years old. You need to teach them some things and so on. But if they're adult, you have to let them be. You can't be fixing adults and teaching them how to grow up. It doesn't work. It'd be nice if it did, but it just doesn't work. It makes everything worse and keeps them from growing up. So yes, being mindful is a good thing. And you should basically go through as much of your day as you can, being mindful. Now, there may be periods when slipping off and letting your mind wander is okay, but don't live your life that way. Make that the exception. I'm not saying that, what do they call it? Gathering wool, is a bad idea. That sometimes is okay too. But don't run your life that way. Let that be the exceptional thing you do sometimes when you're just relaxing and letting your mind wander wherever it goes, see what thought pops in. That's probably profitable sometimes too, but there's a balance, like all things. There's a balance in life between things, and staying plugged in to the now creates opportunities for growth. But it's more work, it's more effort. But as time goes on, that effort becomes effortless, and then it's less effort. It's just the way you are.
Yeah, it's amazing how much choice there is just even in doing the dishes or walking up the stairs or whatever. When I first read your book, I didn't think about that sort of stuff, but now it's very, very apparent. Thanks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
God, Tom, well, how am I supposed to tell my wife now that she needs to do more laundry? Oh my God. She won't see this. So let's move along. Boris had a question for us about this twin flame topic. I'm going to have him try and explain it as best he can. Go ahead, Boris.
It's going to be difficult. Hi, Tom. It's been a long time. Oh, I don't see you. I don't know. So basically, actually, my question, Tom, was about if you're aware of that concept, which is coming from New Age, if you had any experience, and what is your view about it?
Twin flame. I vaguely know a little something about it. I've run across it before. That's that you meet this one other person that you were destined to meet, and that's your twin flame, and the two of you fall madly in love, and it was destined to be that way, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And all the intensity and everything.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, that metaphor, the twin flame, it expresses something that does happen some. Sometimes people are like that. They do connect in a very profound way. And so it's not that experience never happens, but the theory that the reason that happens was because these two flames were destined to meet and be together, and it's all part of a bigger picture and plan. Well, not so much. That's probably doesn't happen that often. Now, it's not that it never happens, but it probably doesn't happen that much, because for the most part, we're not that good at planning our incarnations and who we're going to meet and what we're going to do, because we all have free will. And with free will, plans are just really tough to make too far out. You can maybe plan something for tomorrow, but planning something for a lifetime, something that's going to happen 20 or 30 years later, is a really tough thing to pull off in a world full of free will, because those children, for a long time, where they happen to live and the people they happen to meet is totally outside of their ability to affect. Their parents make all those decisions for them. They could go anywhere, end up any place based on that. So having this idea that these twin flames were, made in heaven and are going to come together, and then they're going to be happy and in love forever. Well, like I say, that event does happen. People do fall in love very deeply. They do sometimes have very quick connections and resonance with each other. That's not a typically, unusual. That's not a terribly unusual phenomena, but I wouldn't necessarily backfill that with a lot of theory of meant to be and destined and so on. I think most of that is just being a little romantic and adding some I don't know, a little romantic flair there to the whole thing. But yes, people who are very well suited for each other can very quickly, develop deep relationships. And in our culture, that's usually because they meet each other's needs. More than anything else, they have needs, and this other person meets their needs, and they fall in need with each other. And it's very satisfying to have your needs met. and it's very emotional, and it's a very big thing in your life. So, turning the falling in need into falling in love, well, that just depends whether it's about your needs or whether it's about what you're able to give to somebody else. And for most people, it's a combination of both of those. But typically, the needs are the bigger part of that, equation. They're the 80%, and the what you can give is the maybe 20%, or sometimes even less. So I think the twin flames thing is a bit overdone, a bit, I don't know, new agey, romanticized, whatever. And life is probably more random than that, because there's just so many choices that move us around of where we are and who we meet and what we do and places we go. There's so much of that basically it's very hard to make that kind of a plan. So I don't see that as a very likely idea, but I won't say that it never happens. There is sometimes planning and things like that can happen, but the twins flame idea would let you think that it happens a lot. It's almost a dominant thing, and it's maybe a happy thought for those who are in the falling in need process. That it's something that was meant to be and destined and all that sort of thing. Probably makes you feel good to believe that. So that's what I think about it, Boris. It's it's a real phenomena that people can feel that way, but I wouldn't read much more into it than
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
Tom, we have to ask, what about you and Pamela? We're getting a lot of talk here in the chat. Was that
would be one of
was that planned?
that would be one of the exceptions. Yes. Yeah, I say it. That's why I said it happens in the margins, because I'm one of those, people that it did happen in the margins too. But it's not a very widely spread phenomena. But it can happen. Plans can be made, but I suspect it doesn't happen so much at the middle to beginning part of consciousness evolution, because there's just too much to learn, and what you need then is just variation. You need experience. You need new things, new choices. You need what's the word for it? Diversity in experience. And there's not a lot of planning going on, and that's where 98% of the people are. They're in that middle to beginning range of their consciousness evolution, and that's because this is daycare or kindergarten, not a college or a graduate school. So most of the people are in that space where that doesn't happen, because they're just diving into the mix and seeing what comes up and dealing with it. And that is the fastest track for evolving, is to have that attitude that you just dive into whatever happens and deal with it. That will give you more variety and a broader experience more quickly than if you were actually to plan what you were going to do and who you were going to do it with. But indeed, I'm in the margin there with Pamela. That was something that was planned before either of us even were born.
What about you had a question, Adam?
Oh, go ahead,
No.
Boris.
My question related to that was about what about I don't know how to say it. Basically, some intensity when two beings are met, whether this is a twin flame concept or another. Basically, my experience I had with when I was with my ex-girlfriend is that that period got very, very intense, as if there is some, orchestration, of course, but also some kind of alchemy that basically putting Boris and Elle together makes like a big bang in some sort.
Mm-hmm.
This
Sure.
is the part which I'm quite interested about the concept.
Yeah, well, that does happen quite a lot. That's the there's a lot going on there when that happens. One of it, a lot of it is instinctual. You have as a human being, you're an animal, and like any other animal, you have instincts around procreation and around survival. You carry a lot of instincts in those two areas. And in those areas, boy meets girl, get married, have babies, babies grow up and have babies. That's the way the species goes. So you have a lot of instincts that push people to do that. And when you do things that resonate with your instincts, you feel good about it. You feel energized. You feel this is right. It just feels right. And so a big piece of that intensity has to do with your instincts. To get an animal to do what he needs to do instinctually, it has to be fairly intense. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. They have to be driven pretty hard. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. For that robin to get out there and find just the right kind of twigs and just the right kind of branch in a tree to start building a nest in so it can lay eggs or whatever. It can't just be a casual mention. You should maybe find some twigs and make a nest. No, it's like, do this now. It's a very strong, dramatic imperative is the way instincts, hit us. They're not just casual things. So the fact that is such an intense thing has a lot to do with our basic instincts. And on top of that, most people have lots and lots of needs, and they feel kind of half empty or 3/4 empty most of the time until they find that significant other, and until those instincts start to be energized, and then all of that comes together. So now they have a lot of needs that are being met that weren't met before, and that feels so good, and that feels so strong, and that is amazing. Plus, they have their instincts resonating, and that's very powerful and very strong push. So you have those two things together, and then you have the social components. Because our instincts, we tend to couple up. And that's true of whether it's heterosexuals or homosexuals. We tend to couple up. We have needs that are met by deep relationships rather than just superficial relationships. And if you're in that social strata and you're uncoupled, you feel like you're missing something. Something's lacking in your life. You have a drive to find significant other someplace. And then when you find something that seems to work, well, that's just very powerful and very exciting. So we have lots of drives and things pushing us, and the pushes can be rather strong and rather dramatic. Yes, like you say, it can be very high intensity, but that's why, because you have a confluence of at least three major parts of our being. The fact that we are driven for significant coupling up with another human being, and we are very needy, and we have holes in our experience base. If we don't get that deep relationship, we want it, we yearn for it, and then when we get it, it goes. So all of that, you can't really separate what is instinct and what's not, but it's all in a basket of things that all kind of work together. It's part of our culture. It's all of that put together. So yes, that boy meets girl thing often is very dramatic and very high energy and high intensity. Then real life, takes over, years later, that intensity doesn't just last forever, because that's a thing of the moment. It's not necessarily something that you expect that high intensity to last for the next 50 years. That's not the way it works. Instincts don't support that. Social system doesn't support that. Your needs are basically being met now, so that doesn't support that. So there's a difference between the initial connection between you and significant other, and the intensity of that. And then as life goes on out the other side, a decade after decade, it's not like that anymore because those things aren't being energized like they were before. You're not in the same space. But if you and that significant other split and go different ways, well, you can start that dance all over again. And it depends on how long you stay out of the dance. You stay out of the dance just a week or two, well, then it's not such the big dramatic thing. You stay out of it for a year or two, then, the big dramatic thing happens all over again. So, yeah, that's being human. That just comes with the avatar, part of the rule set of how we evolved. And instincts drive us hard. If they didn't drive us hard, they wouldn't work.
Okay. I just have a quick question. I'm sorry I've taken a lot of time. One of my understanding about ascension is that it's about transcending a lot of aspects of the human aspect. And I was wondering, if in your experience, it is possible to transcend everything. Like, for instance, we know that at some point of our evolution, there is some needs, human needs that we are able to integrate or transcend. Is it the same in your opinion regarding the whole Maslow pyramid? Like we can even transcend social needs or more?
No, it's not that we should transcend everything. It's not the idea that we outgrow everything and move on. I don't think that's the case. There's things we don't want to outgrow and move on from. Our basic caring about other people. That's why we're here. We're here to be helpful, to give, to become part of the solution, to be useful, maybe to teach, maybe just to hold a hand. We're here for that purpose, and we don't want to transcend that to where, I'm above giving now. I just float around in a stratosphere, meditating all the time. No, that's not practical, or it's not good. It's not for your benefit. You have to, there's some things that you always want to stay connected to, stay involved with, because that's why you're here. It's the basic learning. I guess if you believed that you had learned everything there was to learn, then you might feel like you were ready to transcend everything. But I would say that if you believe that you already know everything there is to learn, you probably don't know nearly as much as you think you do, because what you'll learn is that there's a whole lot you haven't learned yet. That there's always more to learn. There's always more ways to be useful and to be helpful. And you never get to that point where you transcend everything. Then what are you if you transcend everything? What value are you? What's your point? What's your value? How do you give back? How do you lower the entropy in the system? What are you doing? You see, so just what we are, that we are, chunks of consciousness evolving by cooperating and caring and growing and helping. Well, that tells you that you don't want to transcend any of that. You always want to be involved. This idea that you're above close relationships and you're above, needing to interact with other people, and you're above, all of this stuff. Mostly that's in people's minds. They're feeling superior, and that's what you say when you feel superior. You're kind of floating above the fray. And then it's all the unwashed masses, or just you just can't go there and kind of rub elbows with them. It's just such a horrible thing to do. When you get into that kind of mindset, you feel like you have transcended that behavior. Now, what you can do is grow up, see things differently, change your attitudes, change your perspectives. And if we want to call that transcending our ego, then okay, good idea. Transcending our fears, all right, I'll go for that too. That's a really good thing to do. But transcending our usefulness, our ability to be part of the solution? No, you never outgrow that. You always are doing that. In order to keep your entropy low, it takes constant effort. As soon as you give up because you've transcended everything, then your entropy is going to start to grow and you're going to start to de-evolve. So no, we don't want to transcend everything. We want to transcend the ego and the fear. We want to outgrow that. And that we hope to transcend completely and stay that way as much as we can. But we know it'll be constant effort to do that. It's not just something that you get 5 gold stars at the end of your 1000th year or something, and now you're done. So no, transcending things is transcend those things that are problems, but not those things that aren't problems. That's the joy of life. That's what makes life so much fun. I can't imagine if you were transcended everything, what would you be, a zombie? Floating in null space, doing nothing, associating with no one because you were already transcended all that human stuff. Well, the human stuff is what allows us to interact with each other in very intimate ways, very profound ways. That's what this virtual reality gives us is a very high quality of intense interaction from which we can grow, rather than being in the big chat room where we wouldn't have any of that stuff to deal with. All we'd have to do is decide what we were going to say and whether or not we wanted to say it. And that would be the most important decision we ever made. And there's very little growth in that. So being in a virtual reality like this is the place you want to be, because this is where the action is. This is where the experience is. And this is where the growth is. So why would anybody want to transcend being in this virtual reality? This is the fast track. Anything else is a slow track.
Thank you, Tom. Always useful.
Tom, I think we have time for one more from our good friend Nathan here. Nathan, I'll let you ask your question.
Thanks, Adam. Hi, Tom. Nice to see you. Thank you so much for sitting with us and answering our questions. And Boris, thank you for that conversation, because it's still sort of echoing me. It's like, transcend your problems. I love how you said it, Tom. And then, you get to enjoy the good stuff of life. And it's so opposite from spiritual circles, like spiritual practice so you can leave everything. And you're like, no, spiritual practice so you can enter more into the enjoyment of it. So just goes to show I just so appreciate your work. It's so good. Appreciate it. I know we're short on time, so I'm just going to do a short form of my question. It has to do with basically free will on one hand, and maybe not on a different hand. That's kind of the point of the question. And on the other hand, automatic phenomena of our being. And so I've been following your work for a long time, and I've heard you say emotions are choices, and who you are, it comes out in dreams, and these kinds of ways of getting to know ourselves. That's really who we are, what's authentic to us. And I've heard that, and of course I intellectually knew that and processed that, but still at a being level, I thought about choices as like, okay, I raise my arm, I go to the kitchen for food, and emotion comes up, and then in my intellect I say, I don't want to be that way. And it's like it was still so much identifying with this intellect. And what's been happening this week, and I wanted to check in with you about it, is how really the automatic stuff like emotions and dreams, like those are actually free will at work. Like that's actually who I am, which just like I know this intellectually, but even as I'm talking about it, I'm having a trouble finding words, because it's like totally turning my world upside down. That's who I am. And the more that I identify with, sorry, I don't know why this is touching me so much. The more that I identify with just the present moment and how I feel and who I am, I'm very present with people, and I don't plan, and I don't intellectually process so much. And I find this so refreshing from the programming of my culture since I was little, and therapeutic culture as a professional, which says you have these things follow you around. You're a human being over here who has emotions, who has dreams, who has these experiences. And your work is saying, this is who you are. This is you making choices. And just because I'm not intellectually or awareness connected to that the same way I'm connected to moving my arm, it makes it no less a free will choice. And it's in a very positive way. It's kind of blowing my mind this week. And I'm like reorienting kind of my whole life. And so I wanted to check with you if I'm like understanding that right. And then like the application would be like, if a negative emotion comes up before, what I would do is, oh, like I notice it and I don't want to be that way. I'm going to try to feel different. I'm going to try to be nicer. And now it's like negative emotion comes up, like, oh, there's my choice. And there's just sort of an awareness and acceptance of it. And then it's like how I stay present and just seeing how I learn from that choice, and how just if I really am that way, what happens. And there's a way that then, and it's not the same way as me moving my arm right now, but when I'm more present and accepting like that, and I move around in the world, and somehow I do paradoxically have more influence at a deeper place in me, because that's who I am. It's not deeper than me. It's just me. And then I act from a place that I feel compassion for someone, and it's just that way because I feel that way, and that's a choice. But it's not like a choice in how I go about my intellectual daily life. So it's already longer than I wanted to say. But is it making sense? What are you thinking?
Yeah. So you're separating your intuitive from your intellectual, and the real you is expressed really on that intuitive side mostly. And the reason for that is that on your intellectual side is where we run into our beliefs and we run into our ego. That ego that's always justifying everything that we do as the best thing we could have done, and that we are always wonderful and doing the right thing and superior to everybody else. And that ego trying to cover up the fact that we really feel insecure and we're not quite sure we're as good as we need to be. So the intellect has that pollution in it from the fear and from the ego. The intellect expresses that. Now, your intuitive side also expresses that, but not by concocting images and excuses and justifying. It just is. If you feel angry, you feel upset, you feel negative, well, you just do. It's not that you have to justify it. Your intellect needs to justify. Oh, I'm angry because so-and-so is just a real jerk and they did this and they did that. And my anger is entirely justified. I'm a good person. Whereas on the intuitive side, you just feel angry. You don't have to justify anything. It just is. You growl, you show your teeth, and that's just how you feel. So that intuitive side tends to be what you see is what you get. It's what you do, how you act, the choices you make are exactly the way you are. There isn't any overlay of image or overlay of intellect involved in it. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's the way you are, which is why it's good to stay in touch with that. Becoming authentic means you try to get that same authenticity over into your intellect. So your intellect let goes of that ego and lets go of that fear and stops trying to pretend and justify and all that sort of thing. It just accepts how it is and goes on and says, oh, I don't want to be that way. That's your intellect saying, I really don't want to be that way. Well, that's an aware intellect. But if the intellect, instead of saying, I don't want to be that way, says, oh, yeah, anybody would be angry. If you weren't angry at that thing, then you just wouldn't be alive. Anybody that's got a brain would be angry. Now you've justified your anger, and now your anger is a good thing. Whereas if you don't have that ego, then your anger is something that needs to be dealt with. Your anger is not helpful. You see that your anger creates another problem because now you spouted off and said something in anger And now, oh, that's created another problem that you have to deal with, and you just realize that all my anger does is create more problems. It never solves a problem. It just adds more problems to what I had before. And then you realize it's dysfunctional. And then you think, I got to stop creating problems for myself. I don't want to be that way. You see, so it's all part of you becoming authentic. I'd say that's the process you're going through. You're going through a process of becoming authentic. Now, becoming authentic doesn't mean that, okay, I'm authentic and that's wonderful. I'm terrific just the way I am. That's not the implication of being authentic. It's that is the way I am. It may or may not be wonderful. The way you are may have some serious flaws in it. But that's the point. You're aware of them as flaws. And as such, you can do something about it. Whereas when your ego is convincing you that, only smart people like you, would do what you do. And anybody that didn't do what you do just doesn't understand. Well, that's your ego trying to make yourself feel good about yourself, because at a deeper level, you don't feel so good about yourself. So you need that ego to constantly whitewash that fear. So you're in a process of becoming authentic, becoming aware of that there is a real you in there someplace. When you ask people, if you just meet somebody and you can say, who are you really? What is the authentic you? The average person would not have a clue, wouldn't know how to answer that. Well, of course, it's me, just like I am. Well, that's not true. Mostly their image, but they're not aware of that because that's what the image does. It magically changes who you are in your own mind. It doesn't magically change anything, but in your own mind, it magically changes who you are, you see. So when you become authentic, you'll see warts and you'll see problems. That's part of being authentic. But once authentic, you can do something about it. Until you're authentic, you can't do anything about it because you can't see any of it. It's all invisible. So the process of becoming authentic isn't an endpoint. It's part of the process of growing and getting rid of the fear and ego. But you should keep working toward that authenticity always. It's not like that you are authentic. Now I've been certified as authentic. I can stop working on that. Being authentic is something you work on forever. It's a part of your life. It's just that when you first attempt it, you seem to have a lot of things to change. After a while, the changes are not quite so many. Things come up now and again, but it's a process that it's good to start. So I think that's what you're doing. You're in the middle of this discovering who you are, accepting that that's who you are, trying to change the parts of who you are that you don't particularly think are functional, and then moving on and seeing what happens next time you interact with somebody. How do you react? What do you say when you get to that intuitive part that just bubbles out without you thinking about it? But it's good to let it bubble out. You see, we need to actually get to the point that we don't live out of our images, but we live out of our authentic selves. That's where we want to live, which means we start living out of our intuitive side, not our intellectual side. When you live out of your intellect, you're living out of your image. You're living out of your beliefs and living out of your ego. Those are the things that create your image. So you want to get to the point that you are just honest with yourself and everybody else, and that's good because you've gotten rid of the things, that honesty brings that aren't so good. So it's a thing we do all the time, forever. It's not a point where you get certified as being authentic and now you're done with it. It's part of your growth process that you're always in. That process is always ongoing. And your intellect is very quick to snap up beliefs that feel good and have an ego that makes you feel better until you get rid of your fear. And then once you get rid of your fear, you have no need to feel better. You don't have any fear, you just are who you are, and you're a very caring, loving person. So you're just going through a natural progression that people go through as they grow up and as they become authentic and as they start seeing the difference between, acting and being, the difference between image and reality. And it's a process that'll probably take some years, to get through. It's not something you do in a week. It may take, many years, depends. Some people go through that quicker than others. Depends on how much effort you put into it and how important it is for you to grow. If it's really important for you to grow, then it may not take you more than 6 months or so to get through most of it. If it's something that you've sort of been working on, but it's not that important, but it's important, but it's hard because your ego is afraid to go to those places. It's afraid of what it'll find if it's authentic. And it's maybe ashamed or disappointed when it finds negativity where it thought it had gotten over that. Well, you need to get rid of all those self-incriminating things and saying, when you find a problem, that's good, because now you're able to get rid of it. When you're unaware of that problem, oh, that's a problem because you can't get rid of it when you're unaware of it. So unearthing a problem isn't, oh, I thought I was better than that. Oh, I'm worse than I thought. Oh, no. No, it should be great. Okay, I found something. Now I can work on it. Super. So it just has to be a positive attitude thing, not a thing where you find you have issues and now you feel bad about yourself because you thought you were better than that. You find issues, and great. Now you have the possibility to deal with them because you found them. So they're all very positive things. And everybody has to go through it. It's not like everybody else is ahead of you and you're the only one that has these issues. We're all in the same boat. Everybody here, no matter where they are and whatever level they're working at, it's all the same thing. We're all at different levels and different experiences and different parts of the process, but basically it's all the same thing. So at any level, they're doing the same thing. They're uncovering things that they wish they didn't have, and they're trying to fix them. Whether you're at, been around 10,000 times or this is only your first, it doesn't matter. You're in that same boat doing the same things, still trying to grow up and still trying to stay grown up so you don't de-evolve. So anyway, you're doing great, Nathan. You're right where you should be. The things that you talk about and explain are things that are on the path to evolving positively. So just keep working on it. It's working.
Thank you so much, Tom. Keep working on it. It's not a time test. I always keep that in mind when you tell me that. So,
that's right. It's not a time test.
But it is very, very, very important to me. So hoping to make some good progress here soon.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Well, that sums it up for our fireside chat today. Thanks again to Tom. That was awesome. And we'll see everybody on the next one.
Yes, thank you, everyone. The questions were great. It's been fun.
I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our newly created Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.